Welcome. In this tutorial breakdown, I'm going to show you how I created this loop. So I got inspired by some work I saw by Max Hay, and I thought I'd give it a go creating something in Unreal. So I created this in Unreal 5.3. I created a new project and I went to Film Video Live Events, enabled ray tracing. And I went to Editor Preferences and I like to invert middle mouse pan. Went to plugins and enabled the modeling tools, the modeling tools editor mode, and to do this I restarted Unreal. And after that I connected to Cargo from Kitbash 3D, where I downloaded most of my assets. I downloaded most of my assets from Future Warfare. I'm gonna speed this bit up, but basically whenever you choose an asset you like, you hit download and import. So it does take some time, especially of larger files, to import into Unreal. I downloaded mostly some turrets and guns, and then I took them apart, which I'll show you after. After downloading an object, I made sure to duplicate the blueprint first before editing it. And make sure modeling mode is enabled at the top left, and go to mesh and try select. So basically what I did was I selected everything I wanted to keep and inverted it afterwards. So I just started selecting a whole bunch of objects that I wanted to keep, but quite rough, because all I had to do was make sure I select one of the polygons and then hit flood fill. And once you have everything selected that you want to keep, you invert it and hit delete. And once you're completely finished and happy with the model you want to keep, just make sure you hit accept at the bottom. So basically I did this for a bunch of objects. I cleaned them up and started duplicating them and started creating like a square shape or a diamond, because I knew I wanted the tunnel to be like a diamond shaped. So I did this with a bunch of assets. I basically cleaned them up, duplicated them, and I started just making a library of assets that I can easily build my tunnel later. I also downloaded some other assets from Cargo, from Kitbash 3D. I basically just downloaded a bunch of objects and assets I thought might look interesting. So I also imported a Kitbash I downloaded from ArtStation by Oleg. I'll put a link in the description. And I imported these files by just dragging the FBX file into my content folder. After importing the FBX file, I make sure I select all of the objects and I drag it into my viewport. Now these are all separate objects, so what I wanted to do after is merge them together. And you can do this two ways. You can either create a blueprint or you can use the modeling tools to merge them together. So to select all the objects easily, I hold Ctrl, Alt and left mouse button and drag to select all of the objects. And once all the objects are selected, I go to the modeling mode and click on X-form and merge. Once I've merged the object, the pivot point is off, so I like to center the pivot point. And I do this by going to X-form, edit pivot, and then click center and accept. After I merged all of the objects together and gave them some materials. After I continued building a library, and I also downloaded some other assets from Cargo, such as pipes. After I used JS placement to generate some textures and maps for displacement, so I generate these height maps. And this software is completely free and very customizable. It's great for generating textures. I will put a link in the description. Once I created the texture that I wanted to use for my displacement map, I imported it and created a rectangle using again the modeling tools. I went to create rectangle. In the rectangle options, I increased the subdivisions so that the rectangle would have more subdivisions for displacing, and I hit accept. With the plane selected, I then went to deform and displace. After I went to displacement and changed the pattern noise to texture 2D map, then I scrolled down to options and I dragged in the JS placement texture into the displacement. After, you can play around with the displacement height and increase the subdivisions for a higher quality displacement. After creating the displacement, I added some materials and started putting a scene together. After using the modeling mode, I created a torus and changed the subdivisions to 4 to create this diamond shape that I wanted to use as my light source. After creating the torus, I created a emissive material and applied it to the shape, but I realized this was giving me a lot of noise. So I created some reg lights to light up the scene instead of using the emissive material, as this way I would have more control and it would not be as heavy on the engine and give me better results. After I continued building up the scene, I downloaded more assets, duplicated more of the existing ones and moved things around just to fill up the scene a bit more. Once I was more happy with the scene, I added the exponential height fog to create some fog. I would go through the settings, but it was all a bit trial and error and just playing around with the settings to get the looks that I wanted. I kept it all quite basic and subtle. In the settings of the exponential height fog, I did turn on the volumetric fog though to get better results, and mostly played around in the settings of the volumetric fog. After I cleaned up the scene a little, I organized everything and put all the assets into folders. After that, I decided to put the tunnel or the main part of the scene in the center, using the cone as a reference. Once the scene was a little bit more organized and cleaned up, I decided to duplicate the whole hierarchy and start creating the tunnel so I have a better idea on how it's going to look, and I can start playing around with cameras and other things. Once I had a better understanding on how the scene was going to look, I selected the whole hierarchy again and converted it to a blueprint class. This way I could copy the blueprints over and over to create a looped scene. Here you can see I'm just duplicating the blueprint to create the tunnel. After I organized the blueprint and make sure everything was evenly spaced out, I also used whole numbers because this is easier when animating the camera and making sure that it's a perfect loop. And I made a new level sequence. Then I imported the cine camera and started animating the location. And because I knew that the blueprints were spaced out 4,600 units from each other, that I knew that the starting and end point of the camera's position had to be 0 to 4,600 or double that. So I animated the camera 2 blueprints worth, which is 9,200 units. Then because I wanted to animate it on the beat, I decided to do the length of the animation 120 frames, and every 30 frames would be a beat, so that's when the camera would move. So I divided 9,200 by 4 and made sure I animated the camera 2,300 units every 30 frames. After animating the camera, I also decided to give it some rotation every 30 frames and rotate it at 90 degrees every 30 frames. And I also animated the lights, so every 30 or every 15 frames I decided the lights will go on and off. And to make this a constant loop, instead of duplicating the keyframes all the time, you can select what you've animated and go to the graph editor in the top right, and then select the last keyframe and change the last keyframe to cycle, so basically it keeps looping. I also wanted to animate the doors that had the emissive light, so I adjusted the material a bit and made it a material instance, then dragged the doors into the sequence, into the level sequence, and this way I could select the material, which was named element 0, to be able to animate the material. I also animated the position of the tourist and all the lights to move with the camera and when the camera moves. This way it's a perfect loop. I could have also duplicated all the lights and to make sure it repeats just like the blueprints do, but I wanted to have a slight different approach to it. I also mess around more with the camera animation and in the graph editor played around with the movement and speed of how it was animated. I also created a camera shake. In the content browser I created a new blueprint class, and at the bottom you open up all classes and look for the camera shake base. Once that's created, open up the blueprint and close it again, and open it up again. Don't ask me why. And then you'll have a bunch of options. You have to change the Perlin noise to Perlin noise camera shake and put the duration to 0. That way it's never ending, the shake. And after that you can adjust the location and rotation speed and how much it shakes. And then to apply the camera shake to the camera in your level sequencer, go to your camera, hit the plus, and look for the camera shake blueprint. Then I imported a pack I downloaded on Unreal Marketplace, the Niagara Realistic Starter Visual Effects pack, and it has things like dust and smoke, which I wanted to add to the scene. The dust was very small, so I opened the Niagara system and changed the scale of the box and increased the amount of particles. Then I added some lens distortion. I downloaded this pack in the Unreal Marketplace. And to add it, you have to go to your post-processing volume and look for the post-processing volume settings. Then add an array and add an asset reference, and in there you can drag the material. After messing around with the camera lenses and the distortions, I played around a little bit more with the post-processing volume and the looks. Then I wanted to play around with the LUTs. I downloaded this LUT pack on Unreal Marketplace. And to add it, it's quite simple in the post-processing volume. Just type LUT, and in there you can just drag any of the LUTs and get a completely different look and feel. Then I added some smoke from the first Niagara pack, and I scattered some smoke around. Obviously I duplicated the smoke several times and placed them evenly with a distance of 4600 to make sure that the tunnel and the smoke was looping. After that I only made a few minor adjustments and played around a little bit more with the lighting, and added a light to the camera just to get a little bit more backlighting, so it's not completely dark when the animated lights are off. And other than that, I rendered it. I used the movie render queue, and if you want to learn more about the movie render queue, there's plenty of tutorials online, or go to the Unreal page. Thank you for watching this tutorial/breakdown. I know I kept it quite brief. I didn't want to make a super long tutorial, so I skimmed over a lot of the details. I hope it's been helpful. Of course, please leave any comments or if you have any questions below. And I hope you've enjoyed.